For more videos on people's struggles, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hello, you're watching the Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Let's take a look at the headlines. 8 groups urge warring parties to extend Yemen truce. Mexican president declares water a human right, limits exploration. UN Secretary General warns the world of nuclear war. Israeli forces carry out mass arrests of Palestinians. Dozens of humanitarian organizations operating in Yemen on Monday, August 1, urged the warring sides in the country, the Houthis on the one hand and the Saudi-backed Yemeni government on the other, to extend the truce that has been in place for 4 months. The truce is set to expire on Tuesday, and 8 groups, the United Nations and the United States, are stepping up diplomatic efforts to convince the warring sides to extend it for humanitarian reasons. The 4-month truce, longest in 7 years of the war in Yemen, has significantly improved the humanitarian and economic situation in the country. It substantially reduced civilian deaths and injuries incurred from violence and civil conflict. Reports said the truce was largely maintained in the last 4 months, even with occasional minor violations, as both sides accused each other of ceasefire violations and engaging in hostilities. Among 8 groups that have urged the warring factions to extend the truce are Oxfam, the Norwegian Refugee Council, Save the Children, and several others. In a joint statement the groups released, they urged all parties to the conflict to extend the truce for 6 months or more, adhere to its terms, and uphold their obligations under international law to protect civilians and deliver all elements of the agreement, including reopening roads in Taiz. They reminded all sides of benefits and gains made during the ceasefire, such as the decline in civilian casualties, the fall in the number of sick and wounded Yemeni people who need overseas medical treatment, and letting students travel abroad. They noted the increased supply of fuel via the Hodeidah port, which has allowed hospitals and businesses to operate normally. One group, Save the Children, highlighted the very urgent need to extend the truce. It revealed that in its last week, just as the current truce was ending, there was an escalation in violence that led to deaths or injuries of 38 children, the highest number of child casualties since the beginning of 2020. It added that increasing violence in the last 1 month of the truce led to 232 civilian deaths, including 57 children, a 52% rise since the truce began in April. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador on Monday, August 1, announced that the National Water Commission will no longer provide concessions or permits for irrigation and water exploration projects in the drought-affected parts of the country. He urged state and regional governments to be more prudent in granting these permits. President Obrador issued a decree to declare water a human right as well as a matter of national security. The ongoing drought has especially wreaked havoc in the northern state of Nuevo León, where residents have complained of extreme water shortage and irregular supply for days, sometimes weeks. Some weeks ago, the government had declared it an emergency and ordered water to be prioritized for public over commercial uses. The government said existing permits and subsidies for private companies can be reduced, cancelled, or modified. Alarming reports regarding the water crisis note that it is spreading to more and more regions since the last few weeks. In just the last 15 days, the number of municipalities facing water shortages has shot up from 571 to 764. The Monitoring Commission, CONAGUA, has said that more than 70% of the country is suffering from either drought or drought-like effects. In some parts of northern Mexico, the situation is so bad that almost 100% of areas are under drought conditions. One factor for the widespread drought is the country received less than normal rainfall this season. The deficit from January 1 to July 17 was 12.9%. Many activists, scientists, and environmentalists attribute the worst water crisis in Mexico in 30 years to global warming and climate change. The country is experiencing increasingly hotter summers every passing year, which has led many reservoirs to run out of water. Many activists have slammed private companies such as Coca-Cola and Heineken for continuing to extract water for commercial use from private wells when the general public is suffering from acute shortages. Activists have described the crisis as no es sequía, es saqueo. It's not drought, it's plunder. The president has called on these companies to stop production and give the water to the public, but so far they have only pledged to do so or donated small percentages of their total water supply. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Monday, August 1, issued a stark warning to the world about the dangers to humanity from nuclear weapons. Speaking at the 10th Review Conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement in New York, he said that the level of threat inherent to those weapons is the highest ever since the end of the Cold War. He said one misunderstanding or miscalculation by any country can lead to nuclear annihilation of the entire world. According to the Secretary General, the world is under much greater stress than ever due to many ongoing wars, conflicts, human rights violations, climate change, and the coronavirus pandemic, which have significantly increased the risk of use of deadly weapons. Citing this risk, he has called on the international community to dial down tensions and differences and forge more cooperation, collaboration, and dialogue instead. He urged the world to get rid of all 13,000 or so nuclear weapons that are still held by a handful of countries. He denounced the massive investments worth hundreds of billions of dollars that countries are still making in nuclear weapons. Eliminating nuclear weapons is the only guarantee they will never be used, he said. Guterres also called for strengthening the NPT, echoing the Secretary General's sentiment. Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Joe Biden recognized the need for a nuclear weapons-free world and the importance of a new arms control agreement between them to replace the existing New START treaty, which is set to expire in 2026. Israeli occupation forces shot and killed 17-year-old Derar Riyad al-Kafini on Monday, August 1, during a late-night raid on the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. At least 2 other persons were injured during the raid by the occupation forces conducted as part of a mass arrest campaign. The injured were identified as Bassem Sadi, one of the top leaders of the Islamic Jihad in the occupied territories, and his wife. Sadi's wife was assaulted by Israeli forces who arrested him and his son-in-law. According to Israeli news reports, a large number of Palestinians had gathered to oppose the raid when the occupation forces opened fire at them. The midnight raid was carried out by the special forces with helicopters and bulldozers. Residents of Jenin have called for a general strike on Tuesday to oppose the killings and the arrests. Thousands of residents of the Jenin refugee camp participated in al-Kafini's funeral as well. In the last 2 days, Sunday and Monday, July 31 and August 1, Israeli forces illegally arrested over 40 Palestinians from locations inside the occupied territory, including a 17-year-old boy. According to the Palestinian Prisoner Society, more than 24 Palestinians were arrested from Al-Khalili in the southern occupied West Bank by the occupation forces. According to Adamir, there are at least 4,600 Palestinian prisoners inside several Israeli prisons, including 180 children and 30 women. In Nablus, 2 Palestinian youths were killed last week by Israeli forces and several were injured when the occupation forces tried to disperse locals resisting the illegal arrest of 2 Palestinians by using force on Monday. 4 others were arrested from Jenin and 1 each from Ramallah and occupied East Jerusalem. Palestinian news agency Wafa reported the raids and mass arrest campaigns continued on Tuesday, and more than 18 Palestinians were arrested by the occupation forces from across the occupied West Bank. Israeli security forces have been raiding Palestinian villages and cities in the occupied West Bank for months now. The raids have led to large numbers of arrests and demolitions of Palestinian houses. Occupation forces have killed over 60 Palestinians in these raids. Jenin has been the center of the raids, where more than 30 Palestinians have been killed so far this year by Israeli forces. This includes Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. And that's all for today's episode. For more such stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.